It's found on every continent, in every conflict, printed on national flags, and featured in just about every action-packed film, TV show, and video game ever made. There's one of these things for every 83rd person on the planet. And no matter how many times the experts say it's obsolete, it just keeps showing up. Today, the story of the rifle that simply refuses to die, the AK-47, the Kalashnikov. To understand why it won't die, you need to understand why it was born, and for that, we go back to the 1940s. By 1945, the Soviet Union had a serious problem. They just successfully defended Stalingrad, clawed their way to Berlin, lost over 20 million people, had half their own country flattened, and their infantry had spent most of the war fighting with rifles that their grandfathers would have recognised. The standard Red Army weapon was the Mosin, a bolt-action rifle from the 1890s. 5 rounds, worked by hand, shaped a bit like a fence post, and about as modern. For closer work, the Soviets did have a series of very capable submachine guns, but again, they were a bit old-fashioned, and some of them were very crude. Not to mention the fact that while at room-clearing distances they were great, get past 75, 100 metres and they're basically useless. So you had a bolt-action museum piece, or a spray and pray gun that would run out of ammunition within a second or two. There was nothing in the middle bridging the gap. Meanwhile, the Germans had some serious firepower. In '44, they fielded the Sturmgewehr-44, or STG-44, the world's first true assault rifle. Intermediate cartridge, select fire, controllable even on full auto, accurate up to about 300 metres. The Soviets ran into the STG-44 during the closing stages of the war and realised that this was the future. This was what the Soviet Union didn't have, but needed. Enter Mikhail Kalashnikov, born in 1919, one of 19 children in a peasant family in Siberia. Then when the Second World War kicked off, he ended up as a tank commander of sergeant rank. He got knocked out of action in October 1941 at the Battle of Bryansk. Shrapnel in his shoulder, laying in a hospital bed, listening to other wounded soldiers complaining about their rifles. And he started sketching. Kalashnikov was not a trained engineer. He didn't have a degree. In fact, he'd left school early. He picked up his mechanical know-how in a tractor depot. He was a self-taught tinkerer, and he was about to go up against the absolute heavyweights of Soviet Union weapon design. Sudayev, Tokarev, Bolkin, men who'd been designing rifles professionally for decades, backed by entire design bureaus with full engineering staff. But here's where Kalashnikov did something clever. While the other designers were chasing precision and the perfect mechanism, he went the other way entirely. Build it loose, build it tough, build it for some imaginary half-frozen conscript in the mud at -30 who's never had to strip or use a rifle in his entire life. It's the opposite of basically every weapons philosophy at the time, and it was about to change the entire world. Hey everyone, Future Dan here. Just have to quickly say, yes, this is the second time I've had to upload an AK video. We had some issues with the first. Hope you enjoy the new version. I tried to adjust as much as I could to make it fresh for everybody. Secondly, believe it or not, with less than 10 videos on this channel, there's some fake channels and copycats appearing already, which is frankly quite flattering this early in the channel's life. So if you want to make sure you're getting the real content from me and not the fake stuff, make sure you subscribe and hit the bell icon so that you'll know when it's really been posted from me and it's not just something else appearing in your feed. Cheers guys. Right, let's address the elephant in the room. The thing every armchair internet expert will tell you within 5 minutes of any AK conversation. The AK is just a Soviet copy of the STG-44. It isn't. But at a casual glance, I can see why people say that. Side by side, they do share a bit of a family resemblance. Curved magazine, pistol grip, the rough silhouette is pretty much the same. The assault rifle concept came straight from the Germans, no question about it, but it's the concept, not the actual design that they copied. Crack them open and there's basically no resemblance at all between an AK and an STG. The Sturmgewehr uses a tilting bolt mechanism, similar to what you might find actually inside of a BAR. The AK uses a rotating bolt with 2 locking lugs that cam into the receiver. And that bit of engineering didn't come from Nazi Germany, it came from across the pond, the American M1 Garand. Starting with the Garand action is actually kind of genius for an assault rifle, as it's a long stroke gas system, meaning that the gas piston is attached to the bolt carrier itself and rides all the way back and forth with it, which might not be the smoothest, might not be the softest recoiling, but it sure is rugged and dependable. You've got loads of reciprocating mass and lots of gas pressure to make sure that thing is always going to open and close, pretty much no matter what. And by flipping a Garand action on its head, Kalashnikov got all the benefits of the design whilst keeping the line of the barrel lower and keeping access to the gas tube really easy for maintenance. Yes, people do occasionally actually maintain AKs. Throw in some bits of the Soviet SVT-40, a few hints of the M1 carbine, some Browning influence in the trigger group, and it's a proper magpie design, nicking the best ideas from the best rifles of the era and bolting them together into something simpler than any of its inspirations. The first submission, the AK-46, got rejected at the 1946 trials. Back to the drawing board, he came back the following year with the redesigned version, and that one won. The winning design. 1947, the trials are concluded and Kalashnikov's rifle is accepted. Officially adopted by the Soviet Army in 1949, the Avtomat Kalashnikov model of 1947, usually just called AK-47, it fired the new 7.62 by 39mm intermediate cartridge. Don't get that mixed up with 7.62 NATO, that's a full power battle rifle cartridge, that's a whole different thing entirely. 7.62 by 39 is definitely an intermediate cartridge. It was fed from a 30-round detachable curved magazine, and that curve isn't just for some styling cue, although it is a very distinctive part of the rifle. It's quite amazing how different it looks without it. The curve is entirely dictated by the tapered shape of the cartridge. Stacking 30 in a straight magazine would just wedge it solid. And the first version of the rifle definitely had a Soviet kind of weight to it. 4.3 kilograms loaded, just over 9 pounds. But it did drop to 3.5 kilos later on with the stamped AKM. Length is 880mm, that's 34.6 inches with a fixed wooden stock. For reference, it's about the same length as an M4 carbine with its stock extended. This was a good idea. But whereas an M4 has to make do with a 14.5 inch barrel, the AK's barrel is 16.3 inches. Rate of fire about 600 rounds a minute on full auto, muzzle velocity around 715 meters per second, and an effective range, realistically, of 300 meters on a point target, though the rear sight is optimistically calibrated right up to about 800 meters. Good luck with that, especially with these iron sights and without match grade ammunition. Sights line up naturally, although you do have to get your head down fairly low, which might explain some of the popularity of the old insurgency hip firing that we see. And of course, original AK-47 design has nowhere to mount optics natively, not without starting to change parts out. But to be totally fair, neither do any of the other rifles from this era. But AK accuracy is something that people perhaps hark on about, maybe more than they need to. The fact is, this thing will always go off when you pull the trigger, and it's perfectly capable of hitting man-sized targets at its design distances of up to about 300 meters. The selector switch is kind of agricultural feeling at best, but in fairness, it's also kind of a genius design as well. The selector switch is the dust cover, keeping gunk out of the action. Plus, it's often repeated that the order of the switch positions, going from safe, then to full auto, then to semi, which seems wrong compared to most other rifles, actually makes a great deal of sense here, as the reactions of a soldier under stress are going to be to just whack the switch down and get firing. You have to be deliberate to engage full auto, which is actually far preferable to a panicked grunt just going straight to full auto and dumping their entire mag instantly. Mag changes are a rock-in and lock system, which okay, maybe isn't as quick as the AR pattern design, but with training and practices it can still be done very quickly. The rifle basically has 3 controls: a mag release, selector switch, trigger, and if you want to call it a control, just the cocking handle. But it does mean that the AK lacks some nice features, like there's no bolt hold open on the last round fired, so you are more likely to get a click no bang, not realising that your mag's empty. Oh, and stripping the rifle is super easy, 1 button and you're in. So the AK isn't flawless, but all of its weaknesses pretty much all have a flip side, in that it's just so rugged and so reliable. But here's that key innovation that I spoke about. The loose tolerances. Where the rest of the world's gunsmiths were obsessed with parts that fitted within thousandths of an inch, Kalashnikov did the complete opposite. He built in deliberate gaps, bits of the action where you can wobble the parts around with your hands. It sounds mental, but it's genius, because dirt, sand, grit, mud, blood, frozen gun oil, none of it is going to bind up the action if there's nowhere for it to bind. And don't make the mistake of thinking that loose tolerances is the easy route design-wise. Making a design with tolerances that are loose but still remain safe to fire, dependable and actually useful, able to hit something, that's actually a true work of genius. There are some well-documented cases of AKs being found in swamps in Vietnam. Someone sticks a magazine in it, and it still fires. There are AKs that nearly got burnt to a crisp in vehicle fires in Iraq and still work. Rifles left in the Saharan sand for who knows how long, dusted off and put back into service. And then there are all those famous mud and torture tests on YouTube with AKs submerged in just about everything you can think of that still fire immediately. But the really mad stuff is what's happening in border regions and places like the Khyber Pass workshops, where gunsmiths in mud-walled sheds with hand files and scrap metal are knocking out AK copies pretty much by eye. They look like the real thing and they work. Maybe they wouldn't pass any Western safety standards, but they still seem to fire. And in many parts of the world, a full clean of this rifle is dunk it in water, spray some oil on it, and yank a shoelace covered in oil through the barrel. This is the real source of the AK's reputation. Not accuracy, not power, not refinement, just sheer, dumb, refuses to die durability. Early production troubles. Right, here's where things kinda got troublesome. At least briefly. The original AK-47 was meant to have a stamped sheet metal receiver, fast, cheap to manufacture. But Soviet metallurgy in the late 40s wasn't quite up to it. Receivers were warping during heat treatment and were getting rejected in droves. So they pivoted to a heavier milled receiver machined out of solid steel. Slower and more expensive, but the rifle itself was so good that they pressed on. And don't think stamping rifles is the crude, simple option. It's quite the opposite. Getting sheet metal to bend, fold and hold its shape to within tight tolerances and then heat treat it without warping is a dark art. Even today, sheet metal stamping is one of the hardest manufacturing techniques to truly master, which is exactly why the Soviets were struggling back in the 1940s. But by 1959 their industry had finally caught up and the proper stamped version was introduced as the AKM. And that, more or less, is the rifle that conquered the world. Vietnam, the proving ground. The AK had been around for quite a while before it actually got put to the test against a Western power in Vietnam. And the AK made a very good showing for itself. American troops turned up initially with the heavy, full-power M14, way too much rifle for jungle warfare. Then the early M16 arrived, and we've covered that whole saga in another video you can check out up here. But the short version of that is that early M16s in Vietnam were kinda disastrous. Soldiers were found literally dead next to stripped rifles that were trying to unjam mid-firefight. Meanwhile, the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese army were carrying AKs that had been sat in tunnels in 100% humidity for months at a time that just worked reliably every time. In fact, American troops were even beginning to pick up captured AKs and start using them instead of their own kit. The best funded army in the world had been outgunned at the basic infantry level by peasant farmers carrying a Soviet rifle that just kept on firing. The M16 was improved quickly and did catch up, but there was no forgetting the lessons of those early years in Vietnam. So the AK-47 was a monster of a success, but the world doesn't stand still, and neither did the Kalashnikov. By the late 60s, the Soviets had been watching the Americans in Vietnam closely, and one lesson stood out. The Americans had switched to a small, fast, lightweight round, the 5.56 NATO in the M16. Soldiers could carry far more ammunition for the same weight, recoil was lighter, and you could keep a burst on target far more easily. The Soviets looked at the bigger, heavier recoiling 7.62x39 that their AKs were firing and decided they needed to get in on the small caliber game. So Kalashnikov went back to work, and in '74, the Soviet army got the AK-74. And here's the genius of it. They didn't reinvent the rifle. They didn't need to. The AK already worked. They simply rebored the action for the brand new cartridge, the 545x39. Roughly half the parts in the AK-74 are identical to the AKM. The operation, the stripping, the manual of arms is all basically the same. If you can run an AK-47, you can run a 74. The legacy didn't just live on, it barely changed at all. Even to look at, they're pretty much the same, although there's a few obvious giveaways like the straighter magazine, and 74s are often fitted with a 2-port muzzle brake, which helps to tame the recoil of the already very mild 545 down to pretty much nothing. It's reliable, controllable, accurate, and brutal. The AK-74 became the standard Soviet rifle and was churned out in their millions, and it was licensed built across the Warsaw Pact just like the 47 before it. And the Kalashnikov didn't stop evolving there. There was the short U or Krinkov variants, which are highly sought after and beloved by private collectors, but generally kind of hated by those who've had to use it in combat, given that it's quite a violent thing to use with a short barrel, throwing out flames everywhere, and lots of concussion. Very exciting on the range, not so great when people are firing back at you. In the 90s, we got the AK-100 series, a whole family of export rifles in different calibers, including 7.62x39 versions for customers who'd built their entire logistics around the old AK-47 round. There's also the RPK, the extra-long squad automatic weapon variant that was used as a support weapon of sorts. But the legacy has spread far beyond the AK itself. Plenty of the world's most respected rifles owe a serious debt to the Kalashnikov's internal action. The Israeli Galil was built more or less straight off the AK, and early Galils were literally assembled on Finnish-made AK pattern receivers. The superb Swiss SIG 550 traces its operating system back to the SG-540, whose piston-driven rotating bolt was openly derived from the AK. When the best gunmakers in the world want to make a rifle that absolutely will not fail, it's amazing how often they come back to this design. And the AK has been bent into shapes Kalashnikov never imagined, including bullpups. The Ukrainian Malyuk, also known as the Vulcan, takes a standard AK action and stuffs it into a compact bullpup chassis, and it's in the hands of the Ukrainian Special Forces right now. There's been Chinese, Russian and aftermarket bullpup AK conversions too. Same unkillable heart, but a radically different body. There's also the IWI Tavor, a modern take on the AK action put into a bullpup chassis with quite a lot of polymer. The AK-12 was adopted in 2018 as the current standard issue rifle of the Russian army under their Ratnik soldier modernization program. Picatinny rails, an improved trigger, a better stock, modern optic mounts, all the things that the original sorely lacks. But not everyone's convinced that it's an actual improvement, mind. Plenty of Kalashnikov purists argue that while the AK-12 may add many great extras, it also adds weight, complexity and points of failure, with many AK fans just preferring the dependable ruggedness of earlier designs. Which brings us right up to what's happening today. In Ukraine, the largest land war in Europe since 1945, the Kalashnikov is everywhere, or at least its variants. And it's on both sides. Russian troops field the AK-74M and the newer AK-12. Ukrainian troops carry the AK-74 too, alongside vast numbers of older AKMs, some of which are dating right back to the 60s and are still being pulled out of storage and handed to reservists and volunteers. Not to mention we've seen guys training with Krinks and other variants, just whatever they can get their hands on. And right now the tried and true on the battlefield seems to be a really good idea when it comes to rifles. Investing billions into new systems and new training methods seems a waste when it's this that's making the real difference. But no matter what technology comes in, when you're in the freezing mud of a Ukrainian trench, you just want a rifle that goes bang every time you pull the trigger. So maybe that idea of a half-frozen conscript in the mud at -30 wasn't so imaginary after all. Then, crazy as it seems, the AK made it onto national flags, with Mozambique's being the most prominent. No other rifle in history has achieved that level of symbolic weight. I mean, can you imagine an M4 splattered across an American flag? Actually, that would look really cool. But it's not going to happen. Film, TV and gaming. The AK didn't just show up in pretty much every battlefield, It showed up in every action film ever. The first film to feature the AK-47 was a 1955 Soviet comedy, Maxim Perepeltsa? Near enough. About a cheeky Ukrainian villager getting drafted into the Red Army and being issued the brand new Wonder Rifle. Decades before Hollywood ever pointed a camera at one, the Soviets were already using it as a prop in their own cinema. In Western films, Black Hawk Down features an AK-47 in just about every other shot. 2002's We Were Soldiers shows the Battle of Ladrang in 1965, dramatising the first battle where the M16 went up against the AK-47. The crazy Red Dawn from 1984 showed Soviet and Cuban paratroopers invading a small town in Colorado. Then there's Rambo, Heat, Lord of War, John Wick, Lone Survivor, The Hurt Locker. The list runs to hundreds, if not thousands of movies. On TV, the AK's kind of shorthand for that's a bad guy. Somehow it even turned up in MASH, used as a prop in the hands of the Korean and Chinese troops, despite the show actually being set before the AK got issued en masse. A bit anachronistic, but most viewers are never going to notice. And of course, we mentioned them before, the A-Team. The AK showed up a lot, usually in the hands of that week's villain. Oh yeah, and of course, why not? Top Gear?
That's an AK-47.
I know, I thought I might need it.
Then gaming. GoldenEye 007 on the N64 in 1997 introduced an entire generation of kids to the AK, where it appeared as the KF-7 Soviet, the standard rifle of every Russian guard. The model was literally labelled Kalashnikov AK-47 in development before getting renamed. Crysis 2007 put it in the hands of North Korean troops as the FY-71, technically a hybrid with a few later AK bits bolted on, but unmistakably an AK in feel and silhouette. Every Call of Duty since Modern Warfare in 2007 has had an AK in some form, and that franchise has sold over 1 billion copies. Then there's Battlefield, PUBG, the Far Cry series, Escape from Tarkov, Rainbow Six Siege, Squad, Arma. If a shooter has guns, it's probably got an AK. The silhouette is so iconic that audiences and gamers recognise it instantly. Kalashnikov's legacy. Mikhail Kalashnikov lived until 2013, dying at the ripe old age of 94. Lieutenant General, hero of the Russian Federation, and a funeral attended by Putin. Not bad for a self-taught tank sergeant from Siberia. Fascinatingly, he never actually made any money from his design. Being designed in '47 meant that the rifle design belonged to the motherland. In his later years, Kalashnikov did struggle with the heavy burden of having created such a potent weapon that's killed so many hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people over the decades. There's certainly no denying it is one of the most ruthlessly effective killing machines ever created. So why does the Kalashnikov refuse to die? It's not because it's the most accurate, the most powerful, or the most refined rifle ever made. It's none of those things. It refuses to die because it always works, because there are over 100 million of them out there, because it's been handed out, copied, rebored, modernised across 80 years, and it still does the one job it was built for, in any condition, in any climate, in any hands. From a hospital sketch in 1944 to the trenches of Ukraine today, the same basic rifle keeps showing up, keeps going bang, and keeps outliving every rifle sent to replace it. The world and the battlefield has certainly changed, but after nearly 80 years, the Kalashnikov has refused to retire and refused to die. Hey, if you enjoyed this video, I'd love it if you could hit like, subscribe, and check out this video here for more great military content. Cheers!